Dr. Sarah Chen kept her eyes fixed on the laboratory floor as the Zephyrian delegation entered the research facility. The alien beings towered over the human scientists, their crystalline skin catching the artificial light and casting rainbow patterns across the sterile walls. Their leader, Commander Vextar, swept his four eyes across the assembled team with barely concealed disdain. "These are the humans who will assist with our deep space exploration project?" Vextar's voice resonated through the translation device, carrying notes of skepticism that needed no interpretation. Director Hamilton stepped forward, his practiced diplomatic smile faltering slightly under the alien's intense gaze. "Yes, Commander. Our finest researchers and engineers. Dr. Chen here leads our xenobiology division and has extensive experience with hostile environment protocols." Sarah felt the weight of multiple gazes upon her and instinctively hunched her shoulders, making herself appear even smaller than her modest 5'4" frame. She had learned long ago that drawing attention was rarely beneficial, especially in situations involving authority figures who might probe too deeply into her background. This small creature, Vextar's translator conveyed what could only be described as amusement. "She appears ready to flee at the first sign of danger. How did such a timid being achieve any position of significance in your species' hierarchy?" The other Zephyrians chittered among themselves, their crystalline bodies vibrating with what Sarah recognized as their equivalent of laughter. She had studied their species extensively during the first contact protocols, learning their mannerisms and social structures. What they didn't know was that her studies extended far beyond academic curiosity. "Dr. Chen's qualifications speak for themselves," Director Hamilton replied, though his tone suggested he shared some of the alien's doubts about her suitability for the mission. Sarah remained silent, allowing her colleagues to field the questions while she observed. The Zephyrians moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, their society built on concepts of strength and dominance that humans found unsettling. They had approached Earth not as potential allies, but as superior beings offering a conditional partnership in exchange for human labor and resources. The project they proposed was ambitious, establishing a research station in the Kepler 442 system, where initial surveys had detected unusual energy signatures that defied current scientific understanding. The catch was that the system lay within what the Zephyrians called the Ghost Sector, a region of space where several of their expeditions had simply vanished without trace. "The human contingent will serve as advanced scouts," Vextar explained, his tone making it clear that advanced scouts was a polite term for expendable personnel. "Your species' apparent resilience to psychological pressure may prove useful in environments where our warriors have struggled." Dr. Martinez, the team's astrophysicist, raised a trembling hand. "Commander, what exactly happened to your previous expeditions? Our risk assessment protocols require detailed information about potential hazards." Vextar's four eyes fixed on Martinez with predatory intensity. "Fear weakens the mind, human. Your species' tendency toward cowardice is both your greatest weakness and perhaps your only useful trait. Those who cannot master their fear have no place among the Zephyrian Empire." Sarah watched Martinez visibly wilt under the alien's stare, his earlier confidence evaporating. She had seen this pattern countless times before. Beings who used intimidation as their primary tool of control, who mistook fear for weakness and silence for submission. What they failed to understand was that sometimes the quietest individuals were the ones who had learned to channel their fear into something far more dangerous. The briefing continued for another hour, with Vextar outlining the mission parameters and making it abundantly clear that the humans were considered expendable assets. The research station would be established on Kepler 442b, a planet with an atmosphere breathable by both species, but with environmental conditions that remained largely unknown. The Zephyrians would maintain orbital command while the human team conducted surface operations. "Dr. Chen," Vextar's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade, "you have remained silent throughout our discussion. Does the prospect of this mission overwhelm your limited courage?" All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied unwanted attention. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them behind her back, a gesture the aliens would likely interpret as nervous submission. What they couldn't see was the way her fingers automatically found the raised scar tissue that ran along her left forearm, a tactile reminder of lessons learned in far more dangerous circumstances than this sterile conference room. I'm processing the information. Commander, she replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Understanding the environment is crucial for mission success. Vextar's chittering laughter filled the room. Understanding? Child, understanding comes through strength and dominance, not through cowering in corners. Perhaps we should reconsider including such weak specimens in our expedition. Director Hamilton's face reddened with embarrassment, and Sarah could sense his mental calculations about whether replacing her would be worth the diplomatic complications. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably, some looking away as if her perceived weakness was contagious. But Sarah had long ago stopped caring about others' perceptions of her capabilities. She had learned that being underestimated was often the most valuable tactical advantage one could possess. While Vextar postured and preened, demonstrating his species' superiority complex, she was already analyzing potential threat assessments and resource allocation, strategies for a mission into unknown hostile territory. The Zephyrians had made one critical error in their evaluation of humanity. They assumed that their concepts of strength and weakness were universal constants, that their warrior culture's definitions applied to all intelligent species. They saw her quiet demeanor and interpreted it through their own cultural lens, missing entirely the subtle signs that would have warned them they were dealing with something far more dangerous than a timid academic. As the meeting concluded and the delegation prepared to depart, Vextar delivered a final pronouncement. We depart for the Ghost Sector in 1 standard week. I trust the human contingent will not disappoint us with displays of cowardice when faced with real adversity. Sarah nodded submissively, maintaining her carefully cultivated image while her mind raced through contingency planning and threat assessment protocols that had nothing to do with xenobiology research. 7 days to prepare for a mission into unknown territory with beings who considered her species expendable cannon fodder. She had worked with worse odds before. The transport ship Crystalline Dominance cut through hyperspace with the silent efficiency that characterized all Zephyrian technology. Sarah sat in the cramped human quarters, reviewing mission files on her personal tablet, while her 5 colleagues attempted to cope with the reality of their situation in various ways. Dr. Martinez had spent most of the 3-day journey violently ill. Whether from hyperspace travel or sheer terror remained unclear. Dr. Petrov, their geologist, maintained a steady stream of nervous chatter about mineral compositions and atmospheric pressure readings. The other team members, engineers Sarah Thompson and Marcus Webb, plus communications specialist Lisa Park, had settled into an uneasy silence punctuated by whispered concerns about their survival prospects. Sarah found their anxiety understandable but unproductive. Fear was a tool, not a master, and she had learned long ago to forge it into something useful rather than allowing it to paralyze rational thought. While her colleagues worried about the unknown dangers awaiting them, she focused on preparing for every scenario her experience could envision. The ship's intercom crackled to life, broadcasting Commander Vextar's voice throughout the vessel. Human specimens report to Observation Deck 7 for final briefing before planetfall. The team made their way through corridors designed for beings significantly larger than humans, everything sized for the Zephyrians' imposing 8-foot frames. Sarah noticed how her colleagues unconsciously clustered together for comfort, seeking strength in numbers. She maintained her position at the rear of the group, observing both the ship's layout and the Zephyrian crew members they encountered. The aliens moved with military precision, their crystalline skin patterns shifting to communicate status and mood in ways the translation devices couldn't interpret. Sarah had spent considerable time during the journey studying these nonverbal cues, adding to her growing understanding of Zephyrian culture and, more importantly, their potential weaknesses. Observation Deck 7 featured a massive transparent wall offering an unobstructed view of space. Before them hung Kepler 442b, a blue-green world shrouded in swirling cloud formations that gave it an almost ethereal beauty. But Sarah's attention immediately focused on the debris field visible in the planet's orbital zone, twisted metal fragments that could only be the remains of previous expeditions. Commander Vextar stood before the viewing wall, flanked by his senior officers. Behind them, a holographic display showed the planet's surface in 3-dimensional detail, highlighting their intended landing zone and the locations where contact had been lost with previous missions. "Behold the graveyard of the weak," Vextar announced, gesturing toward the debris field. 7 expeditions have attempted to establish permanent presence on this world. 7 expeditions have been consumed by whatever force operates within this system. The disappearances follow no pattern we can discern. Some vanish within hours of landing. Others maintain contact for weeks before silence claims them. Dr. Martinez raised a shaking hand. Commander, perhaps we should reconsider the mission parameters. If your own forces couldn't maintain a foothold, Vextar's 4 eyes fixed on Martinez with predatory intensity. Are you suggesting that Zephyrian warriors were defeated by whatever mystery lurks on this world, human? No, sir. I simply meant that perhaps additional preparation. Cowardice. Vexatar's voice carried absolute finality. This is precisely why we require human assets for this mission. Your species' capacity for survival in impossible circumstances may succeed where warrior pride has failed. Sarah studied the holographic display while the others focused on Vextar's intimidation tactics. The landing zone was positioned near what appeared to be artificial structures, geometric formations too regular to be natural phenomena. Previous expeditions had been drawn to these same structures, suggesting they represented either the source of the mysterious energy signatures or a trap specifically designed to attract explorers. The tactical situation was clear. They were being deployed as expendable reconnaissance assets, intended to trigger whatever defense mechanism had eliminated the previous expeditions, so the Zephyrians could observe and analyze the threat from orbital safety. Standard protocol for dealing with unknown hostile environments when you possessed unlimited cannon fodder. Your mission objectives are straightforward, Vextar continued. Establish a base camp within the designated zone, investigate the artificial structures, and maintain regular contact with orbital command. You will remain on planet until you either solve the mystery of the disappearances or join the ranks of the vanished. Lisa Park, their communications specialist, found her voice. Sir, what are our extraction protocols if we encounter immediate danger? Vextar's crystalline skin patterns shifted, and what Sarah had learned indicated amusement. Extraction protocols assume there is something valuable worth retrieving, human. Your value lies in the data you provide before your inevitable demise. The brutal honesty was almost refreshing. Sarah appreciated enemies who stated their intentions clearly, rather than hiding behind false diplomacy. It simplified the tactical calculus considerably. Dr. Chen. Vextar's attention turned to her again. You continue to remain silent during critical briefings. Does the prospect of imminent death finally exceed your capacity for fear management? Sarah looked up from the tactical display, meeting 2 of Vextar's 4 eyes directly for the first time since boarding the ship. I'm analyzing the mission parameters, Commander. The artificial structures appear to be arranged in a defensive perimeter around a central complex. If I were establishing a base camp, I'd position it here. She indicated a location on the holographic display, outside the perimeter but within visual range of the structures. The bridge fell silent. Sarah realized she had made an error. Her analysis had been too confident, too tactical. A timid xenobiologist shouldn't possess the kind of strategic thinking she had just demonstrated. Vextar moved closer, his massive frame casting shadows across her position. Interesting observation, Dr. Chen. Your assessment suggests someone with experience in hostile territory reconnaissance. Perhaps there is more to your background than your personnel files indicate. Sarah forced herself to shrink back slightly, returning to her carefully maintained persona. I read military tactical manuals sometimes, for research purposes. Curious reading material for a xenobiologist, Vextar observed, but he seemed to accept her explanation. Perhaps you will prove more useful than initially anticipated. The briefing concluded with technical details about equipment deployment and communication schedules. As the team prepared to return to quarters for final pre-landing preparations, Vextar delivered one last comment that sent chills through the human contingent. For what it's worth, humans, your species has exceeded our expectations simply by surviving the journey without complete psychological collapse. Whatever awaits you on the surface cannot be worse than the certainty of dying as cowards in the void between stars. Back in the human quarters, Sarah's colleagues dissolved into varying degrees of panic and despair. Dr. Martinez had progressed from nausea to full nervous breakdown, while the others engaged in increasingly frantic discussions about their impossible situation. Sarah sat quietly in her assigned corner, continuing her mission preparations while listening to their conversations with half her attention. They were good people, competent scientists and engineers who deserved better than serving as expendable assets for an alien empire's curiosity. But they had never learned to function effectively when death was not just possible but probable. She had learned that lesson 12 years ago in circumstances that made this mission seem almost routine by comparison. The drop shuttle screamed through Kepler 432b's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Sarah gripped her restraint harness and watched her colleagues struggle with the violent turbulence that characterized orbital insertion in an unknown atmospheric composition. The Zephyrians had provided them with basic environmental suits and emergency supplies, but their equipment was clearly designed for beings with different physiology and priorities. Through the shuttle's small viewport, she caught her first direct glimpse of the planet's surface. Dense forests of what appeared to be crystalline trees stretched to the horizon, their faceted surfaces reflecting sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Rivers of metallic liquid wound between geometric rock formations that defied geological explanation. It was beautiful in an alien way that made her skin crawl with recognition. Beautiful. Planets were often the most dangerous. Once the landing zone materialized below them, cleared area roughly 1 kilometer from the artificial structures they had observed from orbit. Up close, the structures were even more unsettling than the holographic displays had suggested. Massive geometric shapes that seemed to phase in and out of visual focus, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. The largest structure resembled a crystalline pyramid approximately 50 meters tall, surrounded by smaller formations arranged in concentric circles. Landing in 30 seconds, announced the shuttle's automated system. Atmospheric analysis confirms breathable air composition for human physiology. External temperature 22 degrees Celsius. No immediate biological hazards detected within scanning range. Dr. Petrov managed a weak laugh. Well, at least we won't freeze to death immediately. Small comfort, Dr. Martinez muttered, his face still pale from the descent. Something killed 7 Zephyrian expeditions. Being comfortable while it happens hardly seems like an advantage. The shuttle touched down with surprising gentleness, its landing struts extending to accommodate the slightly uneven terrain. Through the hull, they could hear the alien sounds of an unknown world, a low harmonic humming that seemed to emanate from the crystal trees, punctuated by occasional deep resonances that felt more than heard. Sarah was first through the airlock when it cycled open, stepping onto the surface of Kepler 442b with practiced efficiency while her colleagues hesitated at the threshold. The air carried a metallic tang that made her think of ozone and copper, with an underlying sweetness that suggested organic compounds her sensors couldn't identify. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal, giving her movements a subtle floating quality that would affect combat effectiveness if it became necessary. The crystalline trees surrounding their landing zone stood perfectly motionless, despite a breeze that she could feel against her exposed skin, suggesting they were either not plant life as humans understood it, or operated under entirely different biological principles. Base camp establishment protocol, she announced, falling back on military procedures that her colleagues would assume were part of standard scientific expedition training. Perimeter security first, then shelter assembly, then equipment deployment. Perimeter security? Lisa Park looked around nervously. Security against what? We don't even know what we're dealing with here. That's exactly why we need security protocols, Sarah replied, already moving to examine potential defensive positions around their landing site. Unknown threats require maximum preparation for all contingencies. While her teammates began unpacking their scientific equipment and shelter components, Sarah conducted a tactical assessment of their position. The landing zone offered reasonable visibility in most directions, but was surrounded by the crystal forest, providing multiple concealment opportunities for anything that might approach from the tree line. The artificial structures were visible as a geometric anomaly, approximately 1 kilometer to the northeast, their surfaces seeming to shift and change when observed. Directly, she was in the process of identifying potential fallback positions when her helmet's communication system crackled to life with Commander Vextar's voice from Orbit. Human assets, this is Orbital Command. Confirm your operational status and begin preliminary investigation of target structures. Dr. Thompson activated her response transmitter. Orbital Command, this is Surface Team. We've achieved successful landing and are establishing base camp. Estimated time to structure investigation commencement is 2 hours. Unacceptable delay. Vexitar's voice carried its usual tone of impatient authority. Previous expeditions vanished during base camp establishment phase. You will proceed directly to structure investigation while maintaining open communication channels. Sarah felt the familiar chill of recognition. Standard expendable asset protocol. Keep them moving toward the objective before they could establish defensive positions or develop survival strategies. The Zephyrians wanted to trigger whatever defense mechanism protected the structures, and they wanted it to happen quickly before their human assets could develop inconvenient ideas about self-preservation. Sir, Dr. Martinez's voice shook as he responded. Our safety protocols require secured base camp before advancing into unknown territory. Safety protocols are irrelevant for expendable assets, Vextar replied with casual brutality. Dr. Chen will lead the advance team to the structures immediately. The remainder will maintain base camp position and communication relay. All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the weight of their expectations and fears. Her colleagues looked at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they hadn't been selected for the suicide mission. She knew they expected her to object, to request backup or additional preparation time, to display the kind of rational self-preservation that any sensible scientist would demonstrate. Instead, she began checking her equipment harness and weapon. She caught herself. Her hand had automatically moved toward a sidearm that wasn't there. Muscle memory from situations where rapid response to changing tactical conditions meant the difference between mission, success, and total elimination. I'll need someone for communication relay, she said quietly, her voice carrying the same submissive tone she had maintained throughout the mission. If something happens to me, the base camp needs to know immediately. I'll go with you, Lisa Park volunteered, though her voice suggested she immediately regretted the offer. Communication equipment works better with 2 operators in unknown interference conditions. Sarah nodded, recognizing both courage and sound tactical thinking. Lisa might be terrified, but she was thinking clearly under pressure, a valuable trait in hostile environments. Dr. Chen, Dr. Petrov called as they prepared to depart. Be careful out there. Whatever happened to the other expeditions, just remember that data isn't worth dying for. Sarah paused at the edge of the crystal forest, looking back at her colleagues who were watching her with expressions of guilt and fear. They were good people caught in an impossible situation, used as expendable assets by beings who considered human life equivalent to disposable equipment. They deserved better than serving as bait for unknown predators. I'll be careful, she promised, though she knew her definition of careful probably differed significantly from theirs. As she and Lisa began moving through the crystal forest toward the mysterious structures, Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Zephyrians thought they were sending a timid xenobiologist to trigger whatever trap awaited in those alien geometries. They had no idea what they had actually unleashed. The crystal forest whispered secrets and frequencies just beyond human hearing as Sarah and Lisa made their way toward the alien structures. Each footstep triggered subtle harmonic responses from the tree-like formations around them, creating an eerie symphony that seemed to track their movement through the woods. Sarah noticed that the crystalline trees grew in distinctly geometric patterns, forming natural corridors that guided travelers toward specific destinations. This feels like a maze, Lisa whispered, adjusting her communication equipment as interference levels fluctuated wildly, like we're being herded somewhere. Sarah nodded, her attention divided between potential threats and the tactical implications of their environment. The forest's layout was too organized to be natural, suggesting either intelligent design or some form of evolved trap mechanism. Either possibility indicated they were walking into a carefully prepared killing ground. Orbital Command, this is Surface Team. Lisa spoke into her transmitter. We're approximately halfway to target structures. Environmental conditions are unusual. The forest appears to be guiding our path. Vexitar's response crackled through increasing static. Explain guiding, human asset. The tree formations create natural pathways that lead directly toward the structures, sir. It's almost like following a predetermined route. Excellent, Vextar's voice carried unmistakable satisfaction. Previous expeditions reported similar observations before communications were lost. You are approaching the critical zone where all prior missions ceased transmission. Sarah felt Lisa tense beside her as the implications of that statement registered. They weren't just walking into unknown danger. They were following the exact same path that had led to the disappearance of multiple Zephyrian expeditions. The aliens were using them to replay previous scenarios in hopes of observing the destruction mechanism from orbital safety. Sir, Lisa's voice cracked slightly. Perhaps we should establish a defensive perimeter and conduct remote observation before approaching the structures directly. Negative, Vextar replied immediately. Direct investigation is required. Previous expeditions vanished during remote observation phases, indicating the defense mechanism activates based on proximity rather than specific actions. Sarah cursed silently as her tactical assessment shifted. If the threat activated based on proximity, then they were already committed to whatever engagement awaited them. The smart move would be to retreat immediately and find alternative approaches. But the Zephyrians clearly had no intention of allowing their expendable assets to think strategically about survival. The forest began to thin as they approached their destination, the crystal trees becoming smaller and more widely spaced until they emerged into a circular clearing, approximately 200 meters in diameter. At the center stood the structures they had observed from orbit, but seeing them directly triggered an immediate sense of wrongness that made Sarah's combat instinct scream warnings. The central pyramid stood 50 meters tall, its surface composed of some material that seemed to exist in constant flux between transparency and opacity. The smaller structures surrounding it defied geometric logic, their angles appearing to change depending on viewing angle and distance. Most disturbing were the patches of scorched ground arranged in precise patterns around the perimeter, locations where something had applied intense heat and geometric shapes that suggested deliberate placement rather than random destruction. Those burn marks, Lisa whispered, pointing at the scorched areas. They look like landing zones for shuttles or drop pods. Sarah studied the patterns and felt her blood run cold. The burn marks weren't landing zones, they were shadows. Perfect geometric shadows cast by objects that had been instantly vaporized by some form of directed energy weapon. The precision and placement suggested a defensive system that could track and eliminate multiple targets simultaneously with lethal accuracy. Orbital command, Lisa transmitted. We have visual confirmation of the target structures, significant evidence of previous encounters. Recommend immediate extraction for tactical reassessment. Negative. Vextar's voice carried cold amusement. Continue with direct investigation. Approach the central structure and attempt physical contact. Sarah realized they had reached the moment of truth. The Zephyrians wanted to observe whatever defense mechanism protected these structures, and they were willing to sacrifice both humans to gather that intelligence. Standard procedure when dealing with unknown defensive systems was to probe them with expendable assets until their capabilities and weaknesses became apparent. Lisa, Sarah said quietly, start backing toward the tree line. Slowly. Don't make any sudden movements. But the commander ordered us to die for his intelligence gathering, Sarah interrupted, her voice still maintaining its submissive tone despite the steel beneath the words. I'm not ready to accommodate that request. She began moving laterally around the perimeter of the clearing, studying the alien structures from multiple angles, while maintaining maximum distance from the central pyramid. The geometric patterns weren't random. They formed a defensive grid that would provide overlapping fields of fire for any weapon system integrated into the structures themselves. Dr. Chen, Vextar's voice carried warning tones. You're deviating from mission parameters. Approach the central structure immediately. Just conducting preliminary assessment, sir, Sarah replied, continuing her circumnavigation of the clearing. Looking for optimal approach, vectors. What she was actually doing was searching for any evidence of how previous expeditions had been eliminated and whether any defensive systems might have exploitable weaknesses. The burn patterns suggested energy weapons with limited firing arcs, implying the defensive grid might have blind spots or reload limitations. Movement caught her eye near the base of the central pyramid. What she had initially mistaken for decorative elements were actually the remains of previous explorers. Zephyrian warriors whose crystalline exoskeletons had been fused into the structure's base by incredible heat. They had been integrated into the alien construction, becoming part of whatever mechanism defended this place. Oh God, Lisa breathed, following Sarah's gaze. Those aren't decorations. Those are bodies. The revelation triggered an immediate response from the structures. The central pyramid began to pulse with internal light, and the smaller formations started rotating on axes that shouldn't have been possible, given their apparent solid construction. The air itself began to vibrate with subsonic frequencies that made Sarah's teeth ache and her vision blur. "Orbital command," Lisa shouted into her transmitter. "The structures are activating. Repeat, we have active defensive response." Vextar's reply was barely audible through increasing interference. "Excellent. Maintain position and provide detailed observations of defensive capabilities." Sarah grabbed Lisa's arm and began pulling her toward the tree line as the alien structures reached full activation. The central pyramid surface became completely transparent, revealing a complex internal mechanism that defied human understanding of physics. Energy began building within the structure, visible as streams of light that followed impossible geometric paths through three-dimensional space. "Run," Sarah said simply, abandoning her submissive persona entirely as combat instincts took control. "Now!" They sprinted toward the crystal forest as the first energy discharge erupted from the central structure. The beam passed close enough to Sarah's position that she could feel the heat through her environmental suit. And where it struck the ground behind them, the earth was instantly converted to glass. More beams followed in rapid succession, each one precisely targeted at their position, but somehow missing by margins that seemed too narrow to be accidental. Sarah realized with growing certainty that the defensive system wasn't trying to kill them immediately. It was hurting them, driving them toward specific locations within the clearing. "The trees," Lisa gasped as they reached the forest edge. "It's not firing at the trees." Sarah looked back and saw that Lisa was correct. The energy beams had perfect accuracy when targeting the open clearing, but they stopped at the tree line as if the crystal forest itself provided some form of protection from the alien defensive grid. Behind them, the structures continued their deadly light show, but the immediate threat had passed. They were alive, which put them ahead of every previous expedition that had reached this point. "Orbital command," Lisa transmitted breathlessly. "We have successfully observed defensive capabilities and are withdrawing to base camp for tactical assessment." "Negative." Vextar's voice exploded through the communicator. "Return to the clearing immediately. Your mission is to investigate the structures, not flee from them." Sarah looked at Lisa and saw her own thoughts reflected in the younger woman's eyes. They had reached the point where following orders meant certain death, while refusing orders merely meant probable death. For any rational person, the choice was obvious. "Sir," Sarah spoke into the transmitter, her voice returning to its carefully cultivated submissive tone. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the crystal forest, staring back at the alien structures that pulsed with deadly energy, and made a decision that would change everything. The submissive scientist persona she had carefully maintained for 12 years was about to die, replaced by someone the Zephyrians had never imagined could exist within their carefully calculated parameters. "Lisa," she said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that made the communications specialists snap to attention, despite their desperate circumstances. "I need you to trust me completely for the next few minutes. Can you do that?" Lisa nodded, though her eyes reflected confusion at the sudden change in Sarah's demeanor. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the Zephyrians made some incorrect assumptions about human capabilities," Sarah replied, beginning to strip off her environmental suit's outer layers. "They see us as weak because we don't fit their warrior culture model. But there are different kinds of strength." As she worked, Sarah's movements became precise and economical in ways that had nothing to do with scientific training. Her hands moved automatically to check equipment that wasn't there, muscle memory from years of operations where such checks meant survival. Lisa watched with growing amazement as the timid xenobiologist transformed into something that belonged on a battlefield. "Dr. Chen," Lisa whispered. "Who are you really?" Sarah paused in her preparations, meeting Lisa's eyes directly for the first time since they had met. "Dr. Sarah Chen, xenobiologist, has been my identity for 12 years. Before that, I was Major Sarah Chen, 3rd Special Operations Battalion, Human Colonial Defense Force. I served 6 tours in the Proxima Centauri conflict before officially dying in a classified operation that never happened." The revelation hit Lisa like a physical blow. The Proxima Centauri conflict was legendary among Earth's military forces. a brutal 3-year war against an insectoid species that had nearly destroyed humanity's first interstellar colonies. The casualty rates had been horrific, and the Special Operations Forces had suffered 90% losses during the final campaign. The Zephyrians checked our personnel files, Lisa said weakly. They would have found military records. Not if those records were classified beyond their access level, Sarah replied, continuing her equipment assessment. My official death in the Proxima conflict allowed me to retire from military service and pursue the academic career I had always wanted. Dr. Chen's credentials are completely legitimate. I earned my xenobiology doctorate after the war ended. But why hide your military background? The Zephyrians respect warrior cultures. Sarah's expression darkened as she finished her preparations. Because the Zephyrians respect their kind of warrior culture, individual combat, dominance displays, strength through intimidation. They don't understand humans who learned to fight as units, who mastered warfare through tactics and adaptation rather than personal prowess. They would have seen my background as a threat rather than an asset. She looked back toward the alien structures, now pulsing in steady rhythms that suggested some form of standby mode. The defensive system that destroyed their expeditions operates on their cultural assumptions. It's designed to counter direct assault by powerful individual warriors, not tactical infiltration by someone trained to exploit systematic weaknesses. Orbital command to surface team, Vextar's voice crackled through the communication system. You have 60 seconds to return to the clearing before orbital bombardment commences. Sarah activated her transmitter, with movements that spoke of countless hours of combat communications training. Orbital command, this is Dr. Chen. I'm returning to the clearing to complete the investigation. Maintain overwatch and prepare to extract surviving team members if I succeed. Acceptable, Vextar replied. Dr. Park will remain at treeline to provide observation data. Negative, sir, Sarah replied firmly. Dr. Park returns to base camp immediately. What I'm about to attempt requires no observers. The authority in her voice was unmistakable, cutting through the communication static with military precision. For a moment, even Vextar seemed taken aback by the transformation in the supposedly timid human scientist. You do not give orders to orbital command, human asset, Vextar responded, but his tone carried uncertainty rather than his usual absolute confidence. I'm not giving orders, Sarah replied calmly. I'm providing tactical assessment based on mission requirements. If you want intelligence about the defensive system's capabilities, I need freedom of action. If you want to continue treating this as a simple observation mission, you'll get the same results as the previous 7 expeditions. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds before Vextar responded. Proceed with your investigation, Dr. Chen. Dr. Park will withdraw to base camp as requested. Sarah nodded to Lisa, who was staring at her with a mixture of admiration and terror. Tell the others what happened here. Tell them that humans are more than the Zephyrians understand. Sarah, Lisa whispered, using her first name for the first time. What are you planning to do? Sarah smiled. And for the first time since boarding the Zephyrian ship, it was completely genuine. I'm going to have a conversation with whoever built those structures. They've been waiting 12 years for someone who speaks their language. As Lisa disappeared into the crystal forest, heading back toward base camp, Sarah turned her attention to the alien structures. The defensive grid had been designed by minds that understood warfare at a level the Zephyrians had never imagined. The precision of the targeting, the tactical herding of intruders, the integration of destroyed enemies into the defensive mechanism itself, all of it spoke of military engineering by a species that had faced existential threats. She began walking back toward the clearing, but this time her approach was entirely different. Instead of moving like a frightened scientist trying to avoid danger, she moved like a soldier conducting reconnaissance in hostile territory. Her posture, her pace, her scanning patterns, everything about her movement spoke of professional military training. The response from the structures was immediate and dramatic. Instead of powering up their energy weapons, they began transmitting complex light patterns that had nothing to do with defensive targeting. The central pyramid's surface became a display screen, showing geometric patterns that shifted and evolved in response to Sarah's movements. I see you, she said aloud, though she knew no translation device could convert her words for whatever intelligence controlled the structures. You've been testing the species that find you, measuring their understanding of warfare and tactical thinking. The Zephyrians failed your tests because they think like hunters, not soldiers. The light patterns intensified, becoming more complex and sophisticated. Sarah recognized communication protocols, though not in any format she had encountered before. Whatever species had built these structures was attempting to establish contact with her, responding to behavioral cues that identified her as someone worth talking to. She reached the edge of the clearing and stopped, maintaining a respectful distance while demonstrating that she understood the tactical situation. The burn patterns on the ground weren't just weapon effects. They were a message, showing what happened to those who approached with hostile intent or insufficient understanding. I served in the Proxima Centauri conflict, she said, knowing her words would be meaningless, but hoping her tone and posture would convey the appropriate information. My species learned to fight for survival against enemies that wanted to erase us from existence. We understand what it means to defend what cannot be replaced. The structure's response confirmed her hypothesis. The light patterns shifted to displays that could only be star charts, showing the locations of worlds where terrible wars had been fought. These beings had faced the same kind of existential threats that had forged humanity during the Proxima conflict, and they recognized a kindred spirit in someone who had survived such experiences. From orbit, she knew Vextar was watching in confusion, as his expendable human asset accomplished what 7 Zephyrian expeditions had failed to achieve. She was making contact with the builders of the defensive grid, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through shared understanding of what it meant to be a warrior in the truest sense. The conversation was just beginning, and Sarah had the feeling it was going to be very educational for everyone involved. The star charts projected by the alien structures told a story that Sarah recognized with chilling familiarity. World after world marked with symbols that could only represent devastating conflicts. Entire systems scarred by wars that had raged for millennia. The beings who had built this place knew warfare on a scale that made the Proxima Centauri conflict look like a minor skirmish. As Sarah studied the displays, the central pyramid began to shift its internal configuration, creating what appeared to be a doorway in its previously solid surface. The invitation was clear, though approaching meant placing herself completely at the mercy of beings whose defensive capabilities had already been demonstrated with lethal efficiency. Orbital command, she transmitted calmly. The structures are responding to communication protocols. I'm being invited to enter the central facility. Vextar's response crackled with barely controlled excitement. Excellent. Proceed immediately and provide detailed intelligence about internal configurations and defensive systems. And Sarah almost smiled at the Zephyrian commander's assumption that she was still following his orders. The dynamic had shifted considerably since she had dropped her pretense of timidity, though Vextar didn't seem to have fully grasped the implications yet. I'll provide whatever intelligence proves relevant to human interests, she replied, emphasizing the qualification. In a way that made her priorities clear, she approached the pyramid's entrance with the measured pace of someone who understood that first contact situations could turn lethal with a single misunderstood gesture. The opening expanded as she drew near, revealing an interior space that defied the structure's external dimensions. The inside was vast, filled with floating platforms and energy constructs that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Standing on the central platform was a being that took Sarah's breath away. It stood roughly 8 feet tall, with a physique that spoke of evolutionary adaptation to high-gravity combat environments. Its skin was composed of what appeared to be living metal that shifted and reconfigured itself in response to movement. Most striking were its eyes, 6 of them arranged in a configuration that would provide complete battlefield awareness without blind spots. When it spoke, the words formed directly in Sarah's mind without any translation device, conveying meaning through shared concepts rather than language. Warrior scholar, your kind has walked the fire paths of survival. We taste the metal death memories in your patterns. Sarah understood that she was facing a representative of the species that had built this defensive installation, and that it was reading her, somehow extracting information about her, experiences and capabilities, through means she couldn't comprehend. Served in conflicts where survival required learning new forms of warfare, she responded, attempting to project her thoughts with the same clarity the being had demonstrated. My species adapts quickly when extinction is the alternative. The being's metal skin shifted into patterns that suggested approval, adaptation strength. The crystal hunters who preceded you understand only dominance-weakness paradigms. They measure strength through individual supremacy rather than collective survival. Sarah realized the being was referring to the Zephyrians as crystal hunters, and its assessment was devastatingly accurate. The Zephyrian culture was built around individual warrior prowess and hierarchical dominance, which made them completely unable to understand species that had developed collective survival strategies. Your defensive system eliminated their expeditions because they approached as conquerors rather than potential allies, Sarah observed. Correction, the being replied, its mental voice carrying subtle harmonics of amusement. The crystal hunters eliminated themselves through inability to recognize testing protocols. This installation does not kill. It preserves those who demonstrate insufficient wisdom for starwalking. Sarah felt her blood chill as the implications registered. The Zephyrian expedition members hadn't been killed. They had been captured and integrated into the defensive system's structure. Their crystalline exoskeletons had been incorporated into the pyramid's base not as trophies, but as a form of protective custody for beings too dangerous to be allowed to continue their expansion across the galaxy. The Zephyrians are building an empire based on enslaving or eliminating species they consider inferior, Sarah projected. Your species has encountered this pattern before. The being's response came with a flood of shared memories that made Sarah stagger under the emotional weight. She saw the rise and fall of a dozen galactic civilizations, each one beginning with noble intentions and ending in tyrannical domination of weaker species. The pattern was ancient and depressingly familiar. Advanced species that began as explorers and ended as oppressors. The preservers learned to identify the dominance pattern before it achieves galactic scope, the being explained. We establish testing stations in regions where expansion species will encounter them. Those who pass our tests are welcomed into the greater community. Those who fail are contained until their aggressive phases burn themselves out. Sarah understood that she was standing in the middle of a galactic-scale protective system designed to prevent another cycle of imperial expansion and exploitation. The preservers had been watching the Zephyrians' expansion for some time, and this installation was one of many designed to evaluate their intentions and capabilities. What about humanity? She asked, knowing the answer might determine the future of her entire species. The being's metal skin rippled in what she interpreted as consideration. Your kind shows both promise and danger. You have learned survival wisdom through necessity, but you also demonstrate the adaptability that enables rapid advancement. The testing is not yet complete. What would completion of testing require? The being gestured toward displays that materialized around them, showing real-time imagery of the crystalline dominance in orbit above the planet. Sarah could see Zephyrian weapon systems powering up as Vextar prepared for what he obviously considered the final phase of his intelligence gathering operation. The Crystal Hunters intend to eliminate all evidence of this installation, and the knowledge you have gained, the being observed. Their pattern includes destroying assets once they have served their purpose. Your response to this betrayal will determine your species classification. Sarah felt the situation crystallizing with terrifying clarity. Vextar was planning to bombard the planet's surface, eliminating both the alien installation and the human expedition members who had witnessed it. The Zephyrians couldn't afford to have evidence of their failure reach other species, and they certainly couldn't allow humans to return with knowledge of the preserver's existence. Can your defensive systems protect against orbital bombardment? She asked. Protection is available, the being replied, but only for those who demonstrate worthiness through their choices in crisis moments. Your species stands at a threshold. The path you choose now will determine whether humanity joins the greater community or shares the Crystal Hunters' containment. Through the pyramid's transparent walls, Sarah could see energy building in the Zephyrian ship's weapon systems. Vextar was preparing to eliminate what he saw as a threat to his empire's expansion plans, not realizing that his actions were being observed and evaluated by beings whose technological capabilities made Zephyrian military power look primitive. Sarah activated her communication transmitter, knowing that her next words would determine the future of human-alien relations and possibly the survival of her species. Orbital Command, she transmitted with calm authority. "This is Dr. Chen. I have successfully established contact with the installation's builders. They are peaceful beings who maintain this facility as a test of species intentions. Your planned bombardment would be considered an act of unprovoked aggression against a non-hostile civilization." Vextar's response exploded through the communicator with rage and disbelief. "Dr. Chen, you will provide complete intelligence about defensive capabilities immediately. Your mission is to serve Zephyrian interests, not to establish unauthorized diplomatic contact." Sarah looked at the preserver being, understanding that this moment would be recorded and analyzed by countless other species who were watching, to see how humanity would choose to conduct itself when faced with a test of character. "I'm afraid I disagree, Commander," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had found their true purpose. "My mission is to represent humanity's interests, and those interests include establishing peaceful contact with advanced civilizations whenever possible." The silence that followed was broken only by the building whine of charging energy weapons in orbit above them. The crystalline dominance hung in orbit like a metallic predator, its weapons systems glowing with barely contained energy, as Commander Vextar prepared to eliminate what he perceived as a threat to Zephyrian imperial ambitions. From within the preserver installation, Sarah watched the tactical displays that showed the ship's targeting solutions focusing on the structures around her. The crystal hunters prepared to demonstrate their nature, the preserver being observed, its mental voice carrying neither fear nor anger, only a deep sadness born of watching the same pattern repeat across countless civilizations. Their response to discovering a superior civilization is immediate aggression. "How many times have you seen this happen?" Sarah asked, her hands moving automatically to check equipment that still wasn't there. Muscle memory from years of combat operations where incoming fire required immediate tactical response. 47 times in this galactic sector alone," came the reply, accompanied by brief flashes of memory showing other species making the same choices as Vextar. The dominance pattern is remarkably consistent across different evolutionary paths. Superior technology or capability triggers aggression rather than curiosity or respect. Through her communicator, Sarah could hear the mounting tension aboard the Zephyrian vessel, as Vextar's officers questioned the wisdom of bombarding a planet while their own personnel remained on the surface. The commander's responses made it clear that he considered the human assets entirely expendable now that they had served their intelligence-gathering purpose. "Dr. Chen," Vextar's voice crackled through increasing interference, "you have 30 seconds to provide complete technical specifications for the alien defensive systems before orbital bombardment commences." Sarah activated her transmitter, knowing that her response would be heard not only by the Zephyrians, but also by her colleagues at base camp and whatever recording systems the preservers maintained for their galactic archives. "Commander Vextar," she replied with calm professionalism, "I am formally notifying you that the installation's builders are peaceful beings conducting legitimate scientific research. Any attack on this facility would constitute an unprovoked act of aggression against a non-hostile alien civilization. Your opinions about alien intentions are irrelevant," Vextar snarled. "You are an expendable asset whose function is to provide intelligence data, not to establish diplomatic policy." "Actually," Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority that had nothing to do with her supposed role as a timid scientist, "I'm a representative of humanity who has discovered that we're being evaluated by a galactic community of advanced species. Your actions in the next few minutes will determine whether humans are welcomed into that community or classified as a threat requiring containment." The communication channel fell silent except for the background chatter of Zephyrian crew members as they processed this revelation. Sarah could imagine the confusion aboard the crystalline dominance as Vextar tried to understand how his supposedly controllable human asset had transformed into someone making diplomatic declarations on behalf of her entire species. Your crystal hunters experience difficulty processing information that contradicts their dominance assumptions, the preserver being observed with what Sarah was learning to recognize as its version of dry humor. "Most imperial cultures have that problem," Sarah replied. "They become so convinced of their own superiority that they can't adapt when they encounter something genuinely beyond their understanding." The preserver's metal skin shifted into patterns that suggested approval. "Your species demonstrates the adaptability that enables survival at galactic scales. The crystal hunters will now reveal whether they possess similar wisdom. As if summoned by their conversation, Vextar's voice exploded through the communicator with barely controlled rage. Dr. Chen, you will cease all unauthorized communication and provide complete technical data immediately, or I will classify you as a hostile asset and eliminate you along with the alien facility. Sarah felt the familiar calm that settled over her in moments of extreme danger, the same mental state that had carried her through 6 tours of the Proxima Centauri conflict. The situation had crystallized into stark simplicity. She could either submit to Zephyrian demands and betray the trust of beings who represented humanity's potential future, or she could stand her ground and accept the consequences. Commander, she replied quietly, I formally refuse your order and request immediate communication with Earth Command regarding this first contact situation. Earth Command has no authority in Zephyrian space. Vextar's voice reached levels that probably damaged the audio equipment. You are subject to Zephyrian military jurisdiction and will obey orders or face immediate execution. Actually, Sarah said, allowing a small smile to enter her voice, I believe you'll find that my current circumstances place me outside any jurisdiction you recognize. She gestured to the preserver being, who responded by activating systems that Sarah hadn't even noticed within the installation. The air around them shimmered as defensive fields came online, and the pyramid structure began reconfiguring itself in ways that suggested preparation for incoming attack. From her base camp position, Lisa Park's voice crackled through the communication system with barely controlled panic. Orbital Command, this is base camp. We're detecting massive energy buildup from the alien structures. Recommend immediate evacuation. Negative, Vextar replied coldly. All surface assets are now classified as expendable. Bombardment commences in 10 seconds. Sarah felt the weight of representing her entire species in this moment. The preservers were watching to see how humanity would conduct itself when faced with the choice between submission to imperial power and defense of peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Her decision would become part of the galactic record that determined Earth's future status. Commander Vextar, she transmitted with absolute calm, you're about to make a mistake that will have consequences far beyond what you can imagine. The first bombardment beam lanced down from orbit, striking the installation's outer defensive perimeter with energy that should have vaporized everything within a kilometer radius. Instead, the beam simply stopped. The energy was absorbed by systems that redirected it into the planet's core, where it would power the installation's defensive grid for the next several centuries. Impressive energy output, the preserver being observed clinically. The crystal hunters possess adequate technology for their evolutionary stage. Unfortunately, they lack the wisdom to use it properly. What happens now? Sarah asked, watching as additional bombardment beams met the same fate as the first. Now we demonstrate why the preserver network has maintained galactic peace for over 1 million years, came the reply, and Sarah felt the installation's true power beginning to activate. Above them, the crystalline dominance suddenly found itself surrounded by energy fields that made its weapon system seem primitive by comparison. The ship's engines went dead, its shields collapsed, and its crew discovered that they were no longer in control of their vessel. Orbital Command, Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for an entire species. You are being taken into protective custody by the Galactic Preserver Network, pending evaluation of your species' intentions regarding peaceful interstellar relations. I suggest you use this time to reconsider your approach to diplomacy. Through the communication system, she could hear the chaos aboard the Zephyrian vessel as Vexitar's crew tried desperately to regain control of their ship. Their weapons were offline, their engines were dead, and they were being gently but inexorably drawn toward the planet's surface by technology they couldn't understand or resist. Your species shows promise, the preserver being observed. You chose to protect peaceful contact despite personal risk. This demonstration will be recorded in the galactic archives as evidence that humanity possesses the wisdom required for starwalking. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For 12 years, she had hidden her true identity and capabilities, trying to live a peaceful life after the horrors of the Proxima conflict. Now she understood that her experiences had been preparing her for this moment, the chance to represent humanity when it mattered most. What happens to the Zephyrians? She asked, watching as their ship settled onto the planet's surface under the preserver's control. They will be educated, came the reply with unmistakable firmness. Their expansion pattern threatens multiple peaceful species. They will remain in protective custody until they learn to approach interstellar relations with appropriate wisdom. Sarah nodded, understanding that she had just witnessed the galactic community's method of preventing another cycle of imperial conquest and exploitation. The Zephyrians would survive, but their empire-building days were over. As she prepared to return to base camp and begin the process of establishing formal contact between humanity and the Galactic Preserver Network, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. The Zephyrians had brought her to this planet thinking they were using a timid human scientist as an expendable asset. Instead, they had delivered exactly the right person to pass humanity's most important test.